Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete Wright.
Nikki, I'm just plumb miserable.
Oh, no.
I know. I went to the doc yesterday. I have to go back today. I have discs that are swollen in my back.
That just sounds painful.
It's so painful and stupid.
Did something happen? Like, did you injure yourself in some way? Or
As with all things back and neck related for me, it happened while sleeping. And so I don't know.
That is dangerous.
But it just keeps growing. It started in the lower back. Now it's like radiating pain. I'm miserable. So we're going to do this show, and then immediately after, I shall fall down. And that's what I have to offer today.
All right.
Is being a victim of gravity.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm so excited about this show. This starts because I got a question. Months ago, we got a question by way of my wife, who said, have you ever done a show on this new parent thing? Like what it means to be a new parent and get diagnosed with ADHD. And it turns out we have a fantastic resource who can help us walk through the answer to this question in Dr. Marcy Caldwell. And she's going to join us very shortly. We've missed Marcy. It's been a long time since she's been back to the show, and I'm excited to welcome her back. Before we get started, however, head over to Take Control ADHD, gettoknowus.com, get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to the mailing list, and we will send you an email each time a new episode is released. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Pinterest at Take Control ADHD, and jump into our Discord server, takecontroladhd.com/Discord. That'll take you to the invite screen where you can jump in and join our public community channel. If you would like a little bit more, you can always check out our Patreon, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. Will get you access to the super triple secret Discord channels, early access feed for the podcast, access to lots and lots of other benefits that come with
Did you happen to talk about placeholder? Did that just come up?
No, well, not.
I just want to make sure that people know how awesome your podcast is.
I don't know how awesome the podcast is, but it is. You know, I'm terrible at that. But I deeply enjoy doing it. How about that? If you're interested in listening to a podcast called Placeholder that Pete does, a show about the tech we're using today while we're waiting for something better, that Pete really enjoys doing, but makes no claims to quality or insight, then you should do that. And you get that by becoming a member at any level of our Patreon, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. Thank you for your support there. But you know how giddy I get when I get to talk about our advertiser this week.
TextExpander.
TextExpander. I'm always finding new ways to use TextExpander. You've heard me say it before. It is one of my very favorite. I call it an invisible tool. Do you know what I mean by invisible tool, Nikki?
It's just there. It just does things for you. And you don't even know it's going to do it. It just does it.
Works. That's exactly
it just
right.
Works.
You just like magic fingers. You do a thing on your keyboard and then magically it just works. It just does stuff. It's running in the background. It's just waiting for me to type an abbreviation or a snippet in TextExpander speak. And then when it sees that snippet, it goes to work, instantly expanding from just a few characters on my keyboard to words, sentences, paragraphs, entire pages of text. I'm writing an email. I just hit ;PW. Pete Wright, that's my name. If I hit ;PW, 3 keys, it expands to my entire email signature, whatever I have in there. It's got amazing, amazing features. That's just one little tiny thing. Today, we're talking about new parenting. And if you are crazed with details that come from trying to figure out how to manage your life with new parenting, maybe saving some time at your computer might be useful for you. If that's the case, you should absolutely check out TextExpander. You set it once in TextExpander, you build your snippet library of whatever text you find you're sending to doctors, to caregivers, to, as you'll find in this show, your superhero night doula. Anything you need to type, you save it once, you get it perfect, and then you can create it on the fly easily. But it's not just for me. As it happens, I'm on 2 teams of people that actually work in TextExpander too, and I hope you will explore the team features. The way TextExpander says it, your team's knowledge is at their fingertips. That's true. But what I love about it is if I write something and I put it in our TextExpander team library, I know that when they use it, it won't be screwed up. Like they'll get it exactly as we created it every time perfectly, it is easier for everyone. Get your whole team on the same page by getting information out of silos and in the hands of everyone who needs it. You can share your team's knowledge across departments, so your team is sending unified messages to your customers and isn't spending time reinventing the wheel. So just very quickly, a reminder how it works. First, you put your snippets into the TextExpander snippet library. Second, you can share it optionally with other people that you use snippets. Maybe it's with your partner, your spouse. Maybe it's with your older children, and you need to make sure they have all their numbers right every time they use it, whatever. And then you expand it. You just type a few keys, and TextExpander sees those keys and creates and expands your snippet wherever you're writing on any device. TextExpander is available on Mac and Windows and Chrome and iPhone and iPad. It's everywhere. And for listeners of the ADHD podcast, you can get 20% off your first year of service. All you have to do is visit takecontroladhd.com/TextExpander. Very easy to remember because it's us and then TextExpander. Takecontroladhd.com/TextExpander. It will whisk you over to our page on their site where you can get started. Again, get started now and you'll save 20% off your subscription. The way we work is changing rapidly. Make work the way your brain works by saying more in less time with less effort using TextExpander. Our great thanks to the TextExpander team for sponsoring the ADHD podcast. And now let's talk to Marcy, shall we?
Let's.
Marcy? Marcy Caldwell is director and supervising psychologist at Rittenhouse Psychological Assessments and is a licensed clinical psychologist who's been specializing in the treatment of assessment of ADHD and learning disabilities for over 15 years. She joins us today to answer some of our frequent questions about parenting and ADHD. Marcy, welcome back to the ADHD podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So this whole thing started because I got a question. My podcast dog is doing a little bit of resettling.
Yes.
Are you okay?
He is.
Can you lie down? Just relax. It's going to be fine. Thank you. You're good. You're good. All right. This whole thing started with a conversation with I was having with my wife, and she told me she was having a conversation with one of the women who works with her who was just diagnosed with ADHD. And she said, I didn't even have a framework for understanding that I had ADHD until I became a mom. She got her diagnosis right after, in the first year or two, I think, that she was a mom. And the stresses of becoming a mom unleashed some things that she did not know about herself. And I thought that might make for a really interesting conversation about ADHD diagnoses coming after you become a parent. What is it about becoming a new parent that allows you to see some new things about yourself regarding ADHD?
Yeah, for sure. I think we see this a lot. That's one of the time periods where we see a lot of adult diagnosis happening. And it makes sense kind of across the lifespan. We tend to see diagnoses happening in these kind of critical moments where there's a lot going on, right? So we see it kind of in the 7 to 8 year old range when we're just starting to really kind of introduce heavy academics. We see it again in middle school. We see it again in college and grad school. When we start to introduce new demands, we start to get kind of these peaks of ADHD diagnoses.
Sure.
So what bigger new demand is there than new motherhood when all of a sudden your entire life has been transformed from the outside and from the inside? And so, there's so many different things happening in early motherhood, right? There's all the hormonal changes. There's a giant lifestyle change that has occurred. There is the relationship changes that occur, and then there's all of the additional demands on you and on your life and on your responsibilities that come in as well. And so I think all of these things tend to then coalesce into being such a giant I keep wanting to say burden, but that's a terrible word for early
Yeah,
motherhood.
probably not the right word.
But a giant bottle of responsibilities.
Your whole
That
life
is,
just changes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Mhm.
also think there's something here about women often not seeking out diagnoses when it's just for themselves, right? That if it's just something about, oh, like, I can get through that, it's hard, but it's hard for everyone. I'll just kind of muddle through and get there. But when it then impacts a child, it often then makes it more clear, more obvious, and it then kind of propels women to then do something else, do something additional, because they then start to see how it's impacting other people.
So it's
and
that
particularly a child.
that trigger of becoming a new mom, that those new stresses that make it apparent that it's time for me to act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that those stresses are now impacting somebody other than herself,
Yeah.
right? When it's just impacting herself, okay, whatever, I'll deal with it, right? But now it's impacting somebody else and somebody that I care deeply about. Now it's time to deal with it on a different level.
Well, and I wonder, and you might be able to answer this, how many, and I don't even know if we can actually answer this now that I'm thinking about it. My thought process here is going to inattentive ADHD, right? Because I just recently did an interview about inattentive ADHD and how sometimes those diagnoses get missed because they don't have as much of the hyperactivity. And I'm wondering, like, is there a connection to having an inattentive ADHD, not really realizing that that's what it is? And then you have this big, huge life change and bam, all this stuff starts happening. Like, is there any connection there?
Well, I think that inattentive ADHD goes under the radar more, right? Because it doesn't impact the outside world as much. It's a very kind of internal experience. And it's kind of the residue of inattentive ADHD that then gets picked up by other people, right? That residue being kind of in childhood, it's things like missed homework assignments or not understanding concepts. In adulthood, it's kind of missing out on conversation pieces, missing out on deadlines, things like that. But those are more easily kind of covered over. And I think a lot of women in particular have a lot of pressure to fit in and to kind of blend and to be good.
And be good moms, right?
Yeah, and
Like
be good
there's,
moms
yeah.
and wives and all the rest, right? Daughters. And so it's very tempting to try to kind of cover those symptoms over so they don't get seen by the outside world and picked up, and therefore, somebody says, hey, what's going on? And add to that women are more likely to have inattentive ADHD than hyperactive ADHD. And so women go a whole lot longer. There are a lot of reasons why women go a whole lot longer without a diagnosis than boys and men. But that is definitely one of the reasons.
What about the physiological? Are there physiological hormonal changes that actually are sort of more or less directly attributed to ADHD in the course of becoming a new mom?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things when we're talking about hormones, so basic kind of primer, is that
I need a primer. Thank you. That's good.
I do too.
The two hormones most at play for women are estrogen and progesterone. And estrogen helps our brains metabolize dopamine, which is one of the biggest neurotransmitters at play in ADHD, right? And also one of the biggest transmitters at play with ADHD medication. Progesterone makes it harder for dopamine to be absorbed. And so as these two hormones are in flux throughout a woman's menstrual cycle and then also throughout pregnancy, we see pretty major changes. So the first trimester of pregnancy can be extremely difficult for women with ADHD because we see this huge increase in progesterone. And we also see an increase in estrogen, but we see this huge increase in progesterone that kind of diminishes the positive benefit of estrogen. And so ADHD symptoms can get a lot worse. But then we kind of see this plateauing of mostly just estrogen, which keeps symptoms pretty good. In fact, a lot of women will report that they feel fine. They feel like they're medicated even though they're not, in their second and third trimester. And then in the fourth trimester, so the postpartum period, there is an almost 200% decrease of estrogen in that kind of 3-month period. So there's this like giant nosedive of estrogen, which then creates all of the mood changes that we see in that early stage, as well as a huge ballooning of ADHD symptoms.
That is fascinating. Nikki, did you know this? I didn't know any of this.
No, I didn't. And I'm so curious because I just had somebody ask me the other day, and I don't know the answer, but I bet you do, Marcy. She asked me that if when you're on your period, if the ADHD meds work less.
Yes, they do.
And they do. Okay.
They're much less effective in that luteal stage. So the last 2 weeks of a menstrual cycle. And particularly during those kind of premenstrual symptoms. So in the, 3 to 5 days before a period begins.
They'll be less effective.
Yeah. And ADHD symptoms will be worse. It's like a double whammy.
I want to stay on the new mom. I do, but I do have another question because this comes up so much with my clients. So perimenopause and menopause then, what happens with ADHD and those shift of hormones?
Yeah. So the same kind of scenario where ADHD symptoms get worse and ADHD meds tend to be less effective.
Interesting. Okay.
But
okay, back to the babies.
That second and third trimester are so effective that really what you're saying is you should just remain constantly and sustainably pregnant
for your
all
whole
the time.
life.
During your entire childbearing years, you'll be fine. So many children, but no ADHD symptoms.
And there's no downside to that plan whatsoever.
No. Because we're only focused on right now, Marcy. I don't know if you know this about ADHD. All I care about doesn't matter. Okay.
So I have another question. This is so fascinating to me. All right. So being a new mom, you don't have sleep. I mean, there's no sleep, right? I mean, I remember being so excited after getting 4 straight hours of sleep. And I thought that was just the most exciting thing in the world. So how do you know the difference between this is really hard, I don't have any sleep, I don't maybe have a lot of help, or I'm struggling? How do you know if that's ADHD getting worse or it's just the situation that I'm in is not, it's hard. It's a hard situation.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard for all moms. And I do really think that it is harder for ADHD moms because sleep is so crucial. In fact, research shows that there is a substantial difference in the quality of life between new ADHD parents and just new non-ADHD parents. But the differential there disappears when you take into account sleep quality. And so that shows you how incredibly essential this is, but also how hard it is for ADHD brains to sleep, let alone ADHD brains who are being woken up every 90 to whatever, 120 minutes. That it's hard enough for an ADHD brain to get to sleep the first time, let alone have to get to sleep 5 times in a row. And then it's almost, impossible for an ADHD brain to function when that sleep quality and sleep duration isn't good enough. We see if you deprive a neurotypical brain of just an hour of sleep a night for a week, just an hour, which, we do that all the time, right? For a week, we get ADHD level executive functioning deficits, and that's in a neurotypical brain. So imagine what happens in an ADHD brain when it's deprived of sleep, and to the degree that it is in new motherhood. So yeah, it's really, really hard. And I don't even know, whenever I talk with new moms, I don't even try to disentangle what's ADHD and what's new parenthood and what's lack of sleep, right? Like, it's just all here. And we're just going to have to deal with everything that's here right now.
Because this is
right?
how you're feeling. This is what's happening. It doesn't matter what the label is or the diagnosis.
No,
or
it
whatever.
really doesn't.
You're never going to, how do you even know?
Yeah. Right.
And I don't think you can. And in terms of kind of getting a new diagnosis in that postpartum period, I don't even know that I would recommend that right then, right? Because it's just like, we just got to get through.
It feels like you're sort of panning for gold, right? Like you have all this cornucopia of all the different things that look like ADHD maybe, but it sounds like what you're waiting for is give yourself lots of time after you become a new parent and see what sifts out, see what sticks around. Because if it all goes away, you're fine, but you might discover some new things about yourself. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Let's get you some sleep. Let's get some routines back in your life. Let's, get some help around here, and then let's figure this out. But with all those things up in the air, it's pretty hard to figure that out.
I just a slight sidebar on diagnosing of new parents in particular. Do you see the same sort of trends for new dads? Obviously less hormonal based, but behavioral?
Yeah. So, and I'm not going to speak to this in specific, but there is some interesting research about hormonal changes that happen in new fatherhood, which are fascinating. But I don't know enough to speak at length about them.
Does it involve sympathy weight gain? Because my God, I spent 20 years, I still haven't shaved.
There is definitely some sympathy weight gain happening.
It's all normal.
Yeah, right.
Is there a higher likelihood for an ADHD mom to have postpartum depression? Is that an issue at all? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's something to look out for.
Yeah. Higher likelihood for depression and postpartum anxiety.
Did you finish the question about dads? I feel like you never finished the question about dads.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I need to hear the answer.
We went to the weight gain, and I was just like, you're normal, you're good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I want to hear the rest of that.
Yeah. So postpartum dads, if that's a thing, dads in the postpartum phase of life, do have an increase in ADHD symptoms as well. It tends to be, as you said, less related to hormonal changes and more about responsibility changes, total loss of structure, and any routines that were in place. And this complete lifestyle change that just occurred, right? And so we see a change happening in dads with ADHD, new dads with ADHD. We also see some significant issues with, if a partnership is a mom with ADHD and a dad without ADHD, we also see a lot of distress happening with that non-ADHD partner as well.
But you say distress. What is that? What does that look like?
So that looks like psychological distress, right? So either some symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, and struggling to kind of adapt to the changing demands. And we see increased levels of that distress in non-ADHD partners.
Yeah, one of the things you said earlier was you start having, even if you don't have ADHD, you have ADHD level symptoms if you're missing an hour of sleep and you're neurotypical. That's what it sounds like you're describing to me. If you're non-ADHD and you're structured and you're facing these challenges, distress might look a lot like ADHD.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And honestly, we see some of that clinically, right? Of people coming in being like, I think I have ADHD, and maybe they don't. Maybe it's more about lack of sleep, lack of structure, and changes happening in life.
What's your guidance for people who are dealing with this? Like we've already talked about, like looking for ADHD symptoms in this part of your life is like good luck, right? But at the same time, how do you guide people who are really struggling through this period to find structure and be on the lookout for the things that might be indicators of longer term sort of ADHD symptoms?
My first and biggest guidance is give yourself a whole lot of grace and try to give your partner as much grace as possible too, right? This is an extremely difficult time of life. And yes, there's a lot of joy, but there's a whole lot of pain here too. And so it's not going to look the way you expected it to look. That's true whether you have ADHD or not. But I think especially when you have ADHD, trying to build in structure, trying to build in routine, trying to do all of that while managing this new creature in your life, it's really, really hard. So giving yourself a lot of grace for all the mistakes that you're going to make, giving yourself a lot of grace for, any mood changes, upset that happens, all these things are all expected and totally normal. When it comes to, kind of help, my ADHD symptoms are out of control and I need, this can be one of the many life rafts that I need to grab onto right now to, help me settle this down. I think if you're not breastfeeding, then talking with a psychiatrist about some meds would be useful. I really think exercise, as soon as a woman is able to exercise can be a really key way to help answer. And I say help answer because it's not going to make it all go away, right? But even if it's just, pushing the stroller outside for 20 minutes, getting your body moving, getting outside, bathes your brain in neurochemicals that you need. And when that estrogen level is low, we need to bathe it with as much as we possibly can. And so getting our bodies in motion is one of the best way to do that, particularly when medication isn't accessible. So whether your medication is not accessible because you're breastfeeding, or whether medication is not accessible because we can't figure out whether you have ADHD yet because everything's so in upheaval, going out and getting nature's medicine, which is exercise, is really key. And then, trying to find ways to get sleep, which is way easier said than done, and used to piss me off as a new mom. Be like, sure, great, thanks.
Sleep when the baby sleeps.
Sleep when the baby sleeps.
That's what you always hear. Yeah.
But you know what? There are other things that need to happen too. I need to, eat. But finding other people to help support you so that you can get whatever sleep you possibly can, drip out of it, right? Whether that's grandparents or partners or friends or a night doula or whatever, something to assist you.
A night
Which
doula.
is actually, I think,
sounds like
is
a
nice.
superhero.
Well, they are.
The night doula.
That's exactly what they are.
They are superheroes. But it's also, I think what you're saying are really good ideas for other people who are listening that are seeing friends or family that are going through this. What great ways to help. To be able to come in and clean their house or clean a couple of bathrooms or make some meals or put some things in the freezer, like anything you can do to help. Take the baby for a walk so mom can sleep, what great ideas also to help other people that, are going through this.
Don't just text how can I help, right?
Yeah.
answering that requires a whole lot of executive functioning, and requires getting over all kinds of barriers of like social politeness, right? Don't say, I'd really like to come over at 2 and take the baby so that you can sleep. Sound good? Right?
Right.
Yeah, that's binary. Requires very little thought.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want it to be a yes/no response.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a great thing to say for sure. So I'm curious, I am going to jump ahead a little bit in a different chapter of parenting life. I know that I see a lot of clients who do get diagnosed after their kids get diagnosed. And so they may not have the same like hormonal things going on, but obviously, that diagnosis is brand new, right? So there's still a lot of questions. What would you say to those people? Like, what kind of support structures, or what can they do with this new diagnosis?
While there may not be, although there may be different hormonal changes happening, there probably is still something happening in their life, right? Like something led them to get their child assessed and go through that process, which is not an easy process. So something must have propelled that. So my guess is that there's some kind of stress happening in the home because we also have a new child diagnosis. And then, when adults see their struggles reflected in their kid, this is another really prime time for diagnosis to happen. And one of the ones that we see the most frequently in our practice. And it can be a giant roller coaster, right? So many different things come up for people, everything from, oh no, I gave this to my kid, to I don't want my kid to have to struggle the way I've struggled, to kind of a relieving, like, oh, finally I have an answer, and then 10,000 other ones that I'm not coming up with. There's so many different responses to this, and you can have all of them all at the same time. And I think the next step after you have a diagnosis is to acknowledge that this is a big shift that's happening, right? It can be easy to kind of say, well, this has been the case for me all my life. It shouldn't feel like anything new or different. But it is. I've had clients tell me that it feels like putting on glasses for the first time and being able to see everything clearly, right? And so when you have this new perspective over who you are and how your brain works and how you've lived in the world thus far, that's a major shift that's happening internally. And it's bound to kind of shift how you interact in your family and how you interact in the world. So again, giving yourself some grace as you go through that really difficult process, and going and seeing if you can find someone to help you too, right? Getting some great coaching or therapy to help you through that process because you're dealing with 2 new diagnoses, and trying to find the right strategies for both of these people. And so it's important that you have some help to do that.
I will say, as a silver lining, there is some joy that comes with discovering tools that work for one that also work for the other, right? Like for going through the process with my daughter and realizing that her accommodations we were coming up with at school were really helpful for me. Is right. There's real benefit to that synchronicity, and that can be a silver lining that is truly something to be grateful for. Certainly doesn't work every time, but it's nice when it does.
And we see that in the literature too, that we actually see better outcomes for kids with ADHD whose parents also have ADHD and know about it.
That is awesome. Put that on the poster.
I know, right?
For everyone who is listening in our community who lives with ADHD, just tell your kids you're welcome. That's all you have to say. You're welcome.
Exactly.
Well, there's got to be a lot more. Is it empathy that I'm thinking of? Because you do understand it and you do live with it. So then you're going to empathize more with your child and not just assume that they don't care, or, because they care. You know what's going on because you've lived it. You get it.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that, and then I think from the child's point of view too, they get to see mom and dad, or both, or mom and mom, whoever's in their family, that, oh, look, they struggled, but they came back up. They were okay. There's a lot of good things about that.
I just have a quick ADHD story. So my my daughter is an adult now. She's in college. She's living in Ashland, away from us, and she sends me texts. This is just father-daughter stuff, and she sends me these texts. And you're probably not going to be able to see this when I hold it up, but the other day, she sent me this picture. Right? Can you see that? It's a picture of a woven grass basket, and then immediately below that, can you see what she says?
Hyper focused. I am so something. Awesome.
She sent this at 1:49 a.m. and it says in all caps with so many exclamation points. Hyper focus. I am so wide awake. Wow. And she had just woven a basket out of grass. And so I had written her, I hope that's so cute. I hope it didn't come at too great a cost. And she says, I was asleep 7 minutes after sending that text. Brain got to do what a brain got to do.
Oh,
which is just, that's one of those things. I only share that as a way because it's the way I celebrate having grown up. And I say I grew up and she grew up, for the last 20 years with, living and learning about this stuff, that we don't have to have a parent-child relationship about our collective ADHD anymore. And that has been something that I didn't know to expect. But in this stage, it is enormously gratifying that we can just exchange how funny our brains are and know what to do in spite of the challenges that our brains pose for us from time to time.
Well, and you know what I love seeing about that too is that there's no shame in this conversation. No. This is all like, hey, look, you'll get this, and there's humor to it, and I think that's such a healthy way, because I can see it going so the other way, where somebody's feeling bad because they're not able to sleep or whatever.
Well, I have lived for years with the shame of knowing the genetic consequences of my ADHD, right? That, oh my gosh, I hope it's easier for them than it was for me, that kind of a thing. And to see that the adaptations and the awareness and the way we spoke of ADHD in our house during all those years, from being a new parent through the hard elementary school, middle school, high school period, that we've sort of graduated into a new kind of relationship, both with each other and with our ADHD, has been really something to I think be proud of. I'm really proud of the way we talk about it. And I think that's something to look forward to. If you're able to take care of yourself and do the kinds of things we've been talking about for the last half hour, there is something to look forward to. I got a second kid that I'm ready to ruin, though. So, all bets are off. Who knows what I'm going to do next? So
I love that exchange too, and Nikki, I so agree that the lack of shame there is what so spoke to me, and as you said, Pete, the understanding, right, of this is my brain, and I know what it is, and I'm not judging it, and I also know how to respond to it, and that is exactly what we want, and that is such a gift that really only. So a non-ADHD parent who understands ADHD can help give that, right? Mm-hmm. But to have that communal experience and to be able to feel so seen, just innately seen and felt by another person, I think so many people with ADHD walk around in these little silos of shame and don't get that benefit. And as you said, this is the thing that ADHD parents can give to their ADHD kids that nobody else really can.
Hallelujah. That's something I got.
That's great.
Hooray.
Great way to end.
Yeah.
So positive. I love
Marcy,
it.
thank you so much, as always, for coming back, for going away and weathering the pandemic and then coming back to share more stories with us. We missed you. Thank you so much for being here. Where would you like to send people to learn more about you and the work that you do?
Sure. So I have a blog and digital resource at adeptaddEpt.org. And you can also find more about my practice, Rittenhouse Psychological Services, at rittenhousepsych.com.
We will put links in the show notes. Marcy Caldwell, thank you so much for your participation here. Thank you, everyone, for downloading and listening to this show. We appreciate your time and your attention. Don't forget, if you have something to contribute about this conversation, we're going to be in the Show Talk channel and Discord, and you can join us right there by becoming a supporting member at the deluxe level or better. On behalf of Marcy Caldwell and Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll see you back here next season. That's right, we're taking a little break. This is the last episode of season 24. We'll be back for season 25 of the ADHD podcast after our July hiatus. So don't unsubscribe. We'll see you next month. Bye, everybody.